Hello, everybody. It's a big pleasure to be with you guys again in another webinar series. We have the honor again to have Carolina Diaz from Jamesway. She supported us 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago, with a Spanish presentation. Now it's going to be in English, temperature control for embryo development. As always, this presentation will be recorded and then will be accessible in our YouTube channels. So Carolina, the time is yours. The only thing I think that your screen needs to be shared completely. Uh, uh,
Okay, is
but
it
then we can, yes,
okay?
something is, there we go. So
Okay.
we're ready. So Carolina, thank you for your time and thank you for your effort. And the last presentation was very successful and was very simple. So the time is yours. And like always, at the end, we will have a few minutes for questions and answers. Thank you, Carolina.
Well, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to be with all the people here. So we're so glad to be in this place and to have this space to talk about incubation. And so let's start with this topic of today. Um, so we're gonna cover like the main topic of the one of the parameters that takes most importance in incubation, which is temperature. Basically, there are like, let's say 4 or 5 pillars for incubation. And then today we're going to talk mostly about temperature by itself. So as mentioned, the 4 pillars of incubation will be temperature, turning, relative humidity, and ventilation. So these are the 4 pillars that involves machinery. So basically incubation equipment. I talked about the fifth one that doesn't belong specifically to incubation. It is more related with management, which is biosecurity. However, if we don't have one of these 4 or 5 pillars during the period of the 21 days, that embryo will not hatch. Okay, so talking about the first one is temperature, which we know controls embryo growth rate. It could be faster or slower according to the environment temperature. The second one will be turning. It some of the objectives of turning will be freedom for embryo development, and it also helps with the uniformity of the environment. The third one will be relative humidity, which controls basically moisture loss. The fourth one is ventilation, that helps with gas exchange among temperature and moisture exchange. And the fifth one that we already talked is it is not involved with specifically, or it doesn't depend on machine behavior, but it is also important. If we don't have biosecurity, that embryo is gonna get contaminated. And if it does hatch, it won't have the best performance in field. So let's continue with our main topic of today, which is temperature. So our focus of today is management of embryo heat as a primary responsibility to incubation and result performance. So again, I think on incubation, we always talk about temperature because it's one of the I think the parameters that we're mostly afraid. So when we talk about overheating, everybody says, okay, we're gonna have different kind of problems, not only during the embryo development, but also in egg quality. And then, so we're gonna talk about 3 main topics. The first one will be air temperature. The second will be embryo heat production. And the third one will be eggshell temperature. All of these 3 parameters have like an interaction between other, and they will tell us if we're having the proper, let's say like the proper temperature condition and management or not. So one thing that we should keep in mind is that we can split basically the the incubation period between two periods. One will be talking about cells. One will be cell differentiation, which occurs between day 0 to 12. And then the other one will be growth, which is the process where all the cells that already are designated as different systems and organs, such as digestive system, cardiovascular system, they are gonna start growing. So we gain size. And this occurs between days 13 and 21. So the most, let's say, the most delicate phase for overheating, mostly in the majority of the times, is the growth phase, because that moment is where the embryos are already exothermic and we need to cool them down. So again, talking about the three temperatures that we have, the first one we can get is air temperature, which will be the machine set point temperature. The second one will be the actual temperature, which is the one that we can measure. One way will be with a near thermometer, or nowadays we have like some thermometers that can be connected with the control of the machine, and we can know the temperature of the embryo during the incubation cycle. So that is the second one, which is embryo temperature. And the third one will be the heat production of these embryos. All right. So we have these three interactions in a machine. Our main objective is to have the embryo or the shell temperature between 100 and 101.5. That is our main objective. And try to have all the eggs in this range of temperatures, which is the greatest challenge when we talk about industrial incubation. So this is knowing that this is our main target. We may also know that the embryo at the beginning doesn't produce heat, which means to keep this temperature level up, we might give heat. So that's the reason why we have to have the air temperature, let's say at a high level, or we start with 100.4 in case of a single stage machine. In the second phase or second week, we can have like mesothermic embryos where they don't produce much heat. They are starting to rising up this temperature production, but in a slower rate. So we might need to keep lowering the machine temperature. And at the end of the process, we have the highest peak of heat production. So even though the temperature needs to continue lowering. So first of all, let's talk about air temperature. Air temperature might be affected by 4 different aspects. The first one is the type of equipment. The second one will be airflow design. The third one will be machine temperature set point. And the fourth one will be external requirements. So let's continue with the first one. So the type of equipment. Temperature can be managed in 2 ways in the industrial incubation process. So the one way or one mechanism is, or one technology is multi-stage technologies, and the second one is single-stage technology. So we have different types of set points according to the type of machine. That is one thing that might affect the embryo development. So what type of machine do we have? We need to know and understand what type of machine are we dealing with. The second one is airflow design. So it is very important to understand how airflow goes. Here we have an example of 2 single-stage machines. Both of them have the capability to get a profile and adjust requirements according to embryo needs. However, they ventilate totally different, All right, so this one we can call that is a vertical ventilation. Why? Because if we understand how these arrows are pointing, the air that is on this ECU goes up to the ceiling, and it goes round to the walls, and it returns on this direction. So it's mostly like a circle, which goes up and down, up and down. And on the right picture, we have another type of machine that the fans are located very different, okay? And then that air direction doesn't go up, it goes horizontally. So it goes to the right and the left on each side, because this fan is bidirectional, so it pulls air, throws air to the right and the left. But then it goes horizontally to the wall and it returns to the fan. And this is a very important point to understand, because profiles and temperature set points might be different according to airflow design. So a profile that works really good on this type of machine will not work good on this type of machine, even though if both of them are single stage. So this is a very, very important, because in the field we have found that people think that if we're talking on a single stage, every machine can have the same set point. But keep in mind something. Hot and cold spots here are different than here. They are located in different places. All right. So our main focus on incubation is to keep the temperature in the actual temperature stable. However, we want to have the range as close as possible. And then talking about profiles, it makes a difference between each type of airflow. All right, the third one is machine temperature set point. Of course, depending on the machine temperature set point, we can overheat or let's say delay a hatch. Multi-stage machines, the same as already we talked on the airflow machines. Not all multi-stage machines work with the same temperature set points. So again, understand very well the type of machine you're dealing with. All right, this is one example of where we see that the temperature will be stable the whole time, 21 days, all the year. However, set point is not the same on one brand to another. That is one thing to keep in mind. Second thing to keep in mind on set points. This set point is an average. All right, so an average means that it's in the middle, which means it can be a little bit cold for the embryos that are starting on the endothermic phase, but they can be also a little bit hot for the ones that are on the third week of development and are already exothermic. But we need to keep this balance, and we need to keep always this average on multi-stage compared to a single stage that the machine will adapt to the embryo requirements. Of course, because all of them are at the same age and at the same day cycle. So machine temperature set point can affect, of course, the actual temperature. So we have here an example of a profile. The profile is the key to a single stage incubation. We know endothermic stage is where the embryos absorb heat. So we have here, we start with that set temperature set point of 100.4. And as we go by the first week, we can lower it to 99.7. On the neutral stage, we can decrease from 99.6 up to 98. And the exothermic will cool even more, getting up to 97.4. Again, these profiles are different among type of machines. So this was like a Jamesway profile where we ended up prior to transfer to 97.4. And then this one, if you can see, which is a Chickmaster, a CM, Jamesway CM profile, we can see that we end the profile with 98.4. So again, we cannot use the same profile from one type of machine compared to another. So the key is the profile, but also the key is knowing your equipment. All right, so we know we have the endothermic phase where we can see how temperature goes down, and then we're trying to keep the temperature. Then we have the neutral phase. So air temperature continues to decline to maintain the actual temperature level. And at the end, we have the exothermic phase. Here we have also the pilot reading or the actual reading. And here is the machine temperature, which continues lower. All right, so how can I know, or how can I adjust some temperature? We can add heat for the strains that produce less metabolic heat at the beginning, and we can add cooling or cool down the profile for strains that produce more metabolic heat at the end. So that is one way. But again, we may want to work with actual temperature. Well, so thinking about matching temperature set point, we might also question ourselves and ask, all right, I may have the profile that might work, but is my machine really working to get the set point I am thinking I am sending to it? So it is very, very important. Do you believe in your incubator or hatcher set points? Very important, because sometimes we think that the influence of the hatchability is in the profiles, but not in calibration. All right, so make sure you are doing proper calibration. Go with your incubation equipment supplier. Ask, and if you're unsure, ask the procedure, ask the type of calibrator that needs to be used. So, you know, like one of the I think the challenges we're facing in incubation is the high personal rotation. And these just make us maybe more open to information. So we might need to have everything more standardized, but we should also make it easier ourselves to train people. And I think that is one of the successfuls of this type of events and organizations that just promotes training, and more training. So that is the clue. And that is the core of a hatchery or a company by itself. So another point will be external requirements that can influence again on temperature. So external requirements are crazy important when talking about incubation. So one could be proper pressure in the room, proper temperature and humidity conditions in the room, and of course, negative pressure in the plenum. So we may want to make sure that the hatchery is properly ventilated. Second is the proper hot and cold water conditions. If we don't guarantee that we have the proper pressure and temperature on the water and flow conditions, then the machine probably won't work as fast as we need or at the speed that we need. Or maybe the machine will be without proper cold water when we are in an exothermic phase. So it is very important to control water for the machines that use water to heat and cool down. The third one will be pneumatic requirements. So some of the machines, they need pneumatic requirements for turning especially, and turning does influence on eggshell temperature because it indirectly influences airflow, and airflow will also give us hot and cold spots according to how proper is the airflow within the egg mass. So turning becomes something that we should review when talking about temperature. And the last one is proper energy. If we don't have the proper energy plant requirements, then we'll have problems. Also, if we don't have like a stable energy conditions, then the controls can get problems with calibration. And we already talked about calibration. The second one is embryo heat production. So when talking about embryo heat production, there are 3 parameters that can impact this. The first one will be egg quality, the second one will be fertility, and the third one will be embryo viability. So why egg quality? All right, because egg quality will tell us how many eggs will be viable or not. All right, so for example, if we're facing two eggs that are dirty and that are contaminated, probably there's a high chance that they will die in the early incubation. And if that happens, we won't have as much as heat production. And then if we have like I don't know, I want to say an example. I have a profile for a prime flock. And what happened is with this prime flock is that, of course, for a prime flock, there is a lot of heat on that egg pack. That's what we think. And then we might need to do a profile that should be a little bit cooler. But then if we have a lot of high mortality, early mortality due to dirty eggs, for example, and early death, I won't have at the end that amount of heat. So that profile will be very, very cold to the egg pack that we are working with. So again, egg quality also indirectly impacts the temperature or how we work with temperature. Egg quality can also vary depending on breeder age, breeder nutrition, breeder health conditions, and biosecurity on farm. Or for example, there was something wrong with the truck, with the cooling of the truck, and then they got overheated on the truck or during transportation, and we don't know that. So that's the reason why egg quality is an important parameter. The second one will be fertility. So fertility could be driven, by artificial insemination or natural. The sperm, it will go over storage. Then the sperm transportation goes it gets transportation to the fertilization area. Then we have like a recognition of sperm being inside, and then the sperm acrosome reacts with penetration and we get fertilization. Fertilization is very important because if we have good fertilization, it means that we're going to have most of the eggs viable. And something to think about is, for example, if I have an egg that is surrounded by infertile eggs, that egg will have a lower eggshell temperature compared to an egg that is surrounded by fertile eggs. So again, it impacts on temperature. The fertilization process occurs within 5 minutes after ovulation. Eggshell formation takes about 24 to 26 hours to be completed. Hence, body temperature is between 40 to 41 centigrades, and an egg that has been already laid represents 1 day of embryonic growth. We know that. And it is very important to keep in mind that the incubation does not start in the incubator. It starts prior to the incubator, prior to putting the eggs or setting the eggs in the incubator. So here we have like a study in in sperm storage in the hen, where we see the hatchability after in vivo sperm storage length. All right. So if the length was between 0 to 5 days, here we can see how hatch was 66.21 versus the sperm storage that went from 11 to 15 days. And we have a significant drop on hatchability. All right. And again, there is like let's say like 9 points difference between hatch and fertile. This other study shows the growth rate and livability after sperm storage. So here we have the days of livability of each chickens, and then the percentage of the chickens in farm. So as you can see, we have like really fresh sperm and storage in the hen. We may have way of less mortality compared to the sperm that was stored for more than 11 to 15 days. So it does influence and have an impact also on field. It is very important to know how to identify an infertile egg to a fertile egg and to document this information and of course analyze it. So for example, in the picture below, in this picture, we can see how an infertile egg will be seen like a, let's say like a star. Some of the descriptions describe it as a star or as a solid point. And when it becomes a blastoderm, then we can see like a donut, which is forming and development the white cells surrounded, and they will grow until they become with the blood and the cardiovascular system, which is one of the first organs that get developed. All right, so here we have the BTU production between different type of fertilities. So we have one flock that had the lowest fertility, which was 86%. And here we can see how many or what was the amount of BTUs produced during the incubator period, compared to a high fertility flock, where we have significant higher BTUs, as you can see here. So keep in mind that fertility is important when talking about temperature during incubation. So again, by ovulation, there is 1 day of development. Keep that in mind, which means we're having development here in the farm, in the breeder farm. Care will be taken to protect the embryo, so we might try to have the embryos handle, or the egg pack handle, as best as we can. Both storage length in eggs and sperm cells and temperature have been shown to have influence on hatchability. So storage length influences 2-week livability and performance of broiler chicks, as shown in the previous study. The fertilized egg transitions into an embryo that produces the embryonic heat in the incubator. So again, this is a key point that we would like you to keep it in mind. Embryonic development is a progressive change in the molecular structure. Again, we have different type of periods during the 21 days. And the natural byproduct of embryonic development is heat and also CO2. All right, so on embryo viability, we can just split the eggs in 2 groups. Viable chicks that will hatch, or non-viable chicks, which is the mortality, or the embryos that we pull out from the residue breakout. So embryo viability can be caused by, or can be influenced by, egg handling, egg storage time, contamination, incubation equipment performance, including the 4 pillars of incubation. All of these may influence on the embryo viability. And of course, the target of the main objective is to have the most viable eggs and the most viable embryos in a machine. Very important. Embryo viability, the egg handling. If we kill the embryo due to a wrong temperature drop, or maybe a wrong egg storage management in the incubator, we won't have metabolic heat. So it is very important to keep in mind this. The temperatures that we should have according to each area. Egg storage also has an impact, and we know that if we store the eggs for longer than 7 days, we will have a drop in hatchability, an increasement of contamination, and an increasement of early embryo deaths and late embryo deaths. Okay, so here is a comparison of how the egg storage time influences on hatch percentage and of course on hatch of fertile percentage. So here we have a large difference between 0 to 5 days and 11 to 15 days. So almost 14% of hatchability. Here we have another table that shows a study about body weight and livability after the egg storage length. So again, with the same periods of egg storage, how mortality can be impacted in the farm. So from 0 to 5 days, we can have up to one, for this case, if we had 1.69% of chicks death in the first week compared to 2.56. And one of the reasons why they usually die is because, of course, as egg storage days increases, then we will have more contamination. And again, contamination, if it is not because caused by egg storage, it could be caused because of egg handling and management, breeder, sanitary conditions, or whatever. But again, contamination will influence on the temperature indirectly. Embryo viability will also be impacted of how we're dealing with this. So the machine has a high impact on embryo viability, and the 4 pillars of incubation are very important. So here we can see a study where we have fertility, which is the black line. We have embryo death, which is this one, and embryo death over fertility. So as we can see, as fertility drops, then we will have more embryo death. Third one, the eggshell temperature. So what can impact eggshell temperature? During incubation development, embryos transition through the 3 distinct temperature phases where we already talked about. Endothermic from first week, neutral from mesothermic during second week, and exothermic during the 3rd week. Our challenge is to try to keep the eggshell temperature stable during the whole period. And then the air temperature should be dropped as the process advances. Here we will supplement heat, here we will maintain, and here we will regulate heat. So as embryos transition from endothermic to neutral and generate here, the air temperature surrounding the eggs declines to maintain to 100.4 Fahrenheit. As embryos continue transition from neutral to exothermic stage, and more heat is generated, the air temperature surrounding the eggs should be declined. And again, as embryos transition from neutral to exothermic, then more heat is generated and it should be pulled by lowering temperature. So here we have an example over how much milliwatts the chicken egg heat production had 40 years ago. This is how much temperature we have nowadays. So if we see, there is an increasement of 50 milliwatts. So this study shows how the embryo, the chick embryos has increased on the temperature production. All right, so here's a large difference between the old embryos and the new embryos, or nowadays embryos. 33% plus. Another factor that can affect the amount of embryonic heat will be the age of your breeders. So as you can see here on this graph, we have a comparison of an old flock versus a prime versus a young. All right. So flock age also determines the amount of heat produced by the egg bag. So here we have a comparison between the air conditions that should be maintained between a young flock and an old flock profile, incubator profile, as you can see here. And again, so how does all of this influence temperature? So everything becomes like a house, like building a house or a building. If we don't have like a good basics, we won't have a good building. It is very important to keep everything within ranges since the beginning. Heat production is one of the byproducts of metabolism. Keep that in mind. Again, viability is one of the points that determine the amount of heat that the egg pack is going to produce, and per se, the amount of cooling that the machine might need to use. We want more embryos, so we really like heat production. But with more viable embryos and embryos with a higher metabolism, we may have to have more heat to manage. So balance is the key. We should have heat production and cooling control in order to have a proper embryo development. So it should be just regulated between the amount of heat loss and the heat production. If the development chick is heat stressed, there is a poor utilization of yolk nutrients, and that has been shown in different studies. So we may want to have a proper air temperature in order to guarantee that the chick will absorb the yolk sac as best as we can. Because remember, the yolk sac has a lot of things and nutrients, and the embryo will take all the nutrients from there, but it will also absorb all the maternity immune system. In summary, if we have a good egg quality that is fertilized, we get all these 3 temperature balance plus all the 4 parameters or the pillars of incubation, we will have a viable embryo that will become in a good chick quality. Thank you so much.
Carolina, thank you very much for your presentation. As always, very clear, very simple. Is one of our main goals in Poultry School to provide easy, digestible information. So we don't have any questions in the chat box. So if we don't have any more questions, we will be closing the webinar. And as always, this recording will be accessible in our YouTube platforms in around 1 week. And Carolina, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your passion. And we will keep this collaboration with Jamesway. We appreciate that.
Sure, Rodolfo. Thank you so much again for the opportunity, and have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.